I'm doing a bookshelf tour for this video, and basically the main purpose is to kind of share a bit about what I've read, what I'm reading, and the books that I have that I'm planning to read on my plate. And I will definitely open any recommendations on which books I should read in the immediate future, so that maybe some of you guys want to hear some of my opinions on them. And anyways, let's get started. So roughly the top shelf is like more recreational reading, and then there's the middle shelf, and that's more kind of like academic or non-fiction stuff. And then the bottom shelf, well, it's pretty random, just a bit of everything and mainly stuff that I've already read. Firstly, here I have the Oxford Book of English Verse. It's always been something that's kind of around, and I would read them every now and then if I'm interested in a few of it. I would kind of put a sticky note here and there. Next one here would be Villette, which has shown up on my previous video, and I will link that here as well. Basically this is the like a very old version. I think I've mentioned in that video before. It was published in 1880 by Smith, Elder and Co., which was the original publisher that published Villette, whose owner had like kind of like a love affair with Charlotte Bronte. I also got this from an old bookstore, and I really value it because I love old books, especially one that's so meaningfully published by the original publisher. Next one is The Flatland, which I have not read. The blurb looks really interesting. It's basically about how imagining a world where every creature is like two-dimensional, and it's really part geometry lesson, part social satire, and it really kind of explores people's dimensional prejudices with this really daring thought experiment. Slaughterhouse-Five, I've known it's a really famous book, and I've wanted to read it for a really long time. It's basically like an anti-war book, and it uses a lot of like kind of like dry humor, and it's very modern writing, so it's not on one of my top like immediate to read list, but that will definitely be in line sometime in the future. The Good Soldier, another one from secondhand books at the Cambridge Market. This one, basically, I had a teacher in high school who really loved this book and strongly recommended it to me. The reason why I decided to buy it and would probably read it in the near future is because I know that it has some sort of unreliable narration, and I'm really interested in that sort of writing. Also, there is a bit of an element of doubt on whether I would like it or not, because I've mentioned in a previous video that I'm not that big of a fan of American literature, and this one is American. But of course, even though I haven't really liked the majority of the American novels I've read, I'm definitely open to trying something more. The next chunk here, Ulysses. There's no words needed for this. I've tried to start it once, probably immediately after I graduated high school, and then I read a little bit but gave up. And then another day I saw it at another secondhand bookstore, and yes, a lot of my books, most of them are secondhand. I would only buy new ones if I couldn't find them secondhand anywhere, or if I especially wanted a certain edition. So I bought it, and then I felt like I just really want to give myself the determination to read it. Even though, yeah, for like another big book, War and Peace, that I felt like I really should read, I got like a third of the way through and I couldn't go on. So I will give this another attempt, definitely during a holiday, because if I try to read this during term time, I think it will kill me. But I hope it will work out. Crime and Punishment, another thrifted one. I do have one copy at home, but it's like really far away. So I've got like a really cheap copy here because I do really want to read this book. I've actually started it, and I got through probably like a fourth of it when I was in high school, and then I stopped. I feel like high school me just couldn't appreciate a lot of things that I think I would appreciate now. And after reading a lot of Dostoevsky's other works, I do quite like him, and maybe I'll do a video fully on him because I've read mainly his shorter works. I haven't read the longer ones. Yeah, I just have a few of longer books, but I do really want to read those, so this will be one of the top ones on my plan, possibly. Demian by Hermann Hesse. You can check out my previous video on Hesse where I talked about 3 of his books. This one is on my to-read list. It sounds interesting. I really don't know much about it, but given that I have a general good impression of Hesse so far, this probably will be in line sometime in the far future. The Tin Drum. So this is kind of another one talking about war and its destruction, especially like that period of life, in a satirical way. And it has like a lot of really dramatic, unrealistic metaphorical elements, so that sort of work I'm relatively new to, and yes, it's a big work, so another one reserved for the holidays, probably not in the near future. And then we have Dr. Zhivago, which showed up in my October-November reading summary. I'm almost done with this book, so I would definitely talk more on it in some of the future videos. I think I actually quite liked it. It's a really interesting and rich book. I'm currently on this one by Epictetus, one of the Penguin Great Ideas books called Of Human Freedom. Just started. It's basically this philosopher's musings on how we should conduct our lives and what role freedom plays, etc. Concept of law, yeah, it might show up again in another one of my summary videos, because last time I was like halfway through and I talked about what I got from this book so far. It's a library book. I'll probably return it after I make the video on it, but it was pretty interesting. And then there's Kafka, nothing much to say about it. You could check out my previous videos in like September, October, November for some of the stories that I really liked on this. Here I have Brave New World, which is, I know, such a classic in dystopian literature. I'm not a huge fan of dystopian literature. I had moderate opinions on most of them, a few I didn't like, but I really like 1984. So also this is probably one of the more further down the track ones on my to read list. Poems for Life, it's really interesting. Like, yeah, I've read like a lot of the poems in here because they basically like divide it into sections, and it's like it starts from like birth and beginnings, and then it moves towards like childhood, growing up, making a living and making love, family life, and this getting older, looking back, and like intimations of mortality, mourning and monuments, and yeah. So it's really like they put this collection of poems that kind of walk you through the different themes that you experience as you go through life. And I think it's a really interesting grouping, and they've got like a pretty wide selection of poems throughout English history. I literally don't know anything about this book nor anything about this author. London Belongs to Me. I just picked it up at the Cambridge secondhand market as well because it looked interesting. It's like it was set in like 1938 and talking about life on the brink of when World War II is going to break. And I think it's interesting because it's more like a holistic picture of the city and its people as a whole. It's a big book. It seems interesting. I hope it'll be interesting, but it's probably one of the ones more further down the line because I'm not like desperate to read it. Yes, Hartley, The Go-Between. It seems really interesting. I've actually wanted to read it for a really long time because I've read a few quotes from this book and I'm really interested in it. Basically, well, the blurb says it's a lot about like deceit and desire and just more like psychological and societal stuff set in Edwardian society. So yeah, looks pretty interesting. Now we're moving on to the second shelf, and that is less fictional stuff. This one, Skepticism, a Contemporary Reader. One of the books I borrowed for my university reading, and as the title said, is basically about skepticism, which is a really prominent philosophical position that says everything you know that you perceive by the senses is false because, you know, you could just be a brain in a vat or you could just be dreaming, and there's so many different theories and counter-arguments to this position that's very much all covered in the book. I definitely haven't read the whole thing, I just read whatever I needed. I Am Right and You Are Wrong, another one that I had no idea, never heard of it, but I just saw it at the market and I picked it up. And it's basically, it's interesting because the blurb says, in this book, Mr. Edward de Bono, who is well known worldwide for his origination of lateral thinking, puts forward a direct challenge to what he calls the rock logic of Western thinking. Rock logic is based on rigid categories, absolutes, argument, and adversarial point scoring. Edward de Bono believes that this thinking cannot provide the constructive energies that we are going to need in order to solve problems and create a better future as we move towards the year 2000. Instead of rock logic, he proposes the water logic of perception, drawing on an understanding of the brain as a self-organizing information system. Dr. de Bono shows that perception is a key to more constructive thinking and the serious creativity of design. I'm interested by this blurb because I think very much of what philosophy, especially the Anglo-American analytic philosophy, does is the rock logic, so I really wanted to see the other side of the argument and see if I could be convinced. I got English fiction of the early modern period. This is a period that I'm really interested in. That's why I got this book. I remember it was like on sale for £1 and I was like, oh, it's £1, I couldn't do anything else with it anyway, so why not get it? Even though I'm not the most desperate to read about it, it basically talks about, you know, transitional writers of that period like Hardy and James and Conrad, and there's like Virginia Woolf, Joyce, D.H. Lawrence, and also like some other themes like politics and fiction of that period, so I haven't really started it, but I might, you know, just pick and read a few of the writings in it sometime. Plato's Symposium. I think this is one of our texts for aesthetics paper this year, but I don't think it's mandatory that you have to read it. You can just get to know a bit about it. It's not like a text that you have to study. I got this because one of my friends was moving away out of college because he like graduated. So he gave me a few of his books for free because he just wanted to get rid of them, and had this. And he said it was interesting. He also studied philosophy. So I just got this. I don't know when I'll read it. This one, A Philosopher Looks at Work. I think it was really popular, like maybe it still is, but it was really popular in a lot of the bookstores that were like hitting the front shelves a while back. I didn't actually buy it. The same friend gave it to me. He said he hasn't finished it, but it's like alright. Since it's like a free book, and I've always kind of been curious about it, even though I'm not like desperately curious about it. I was like, free book, why not? I'll just get this. I don't know why I have this, but I have the Cambridge Quarterly, which I found like at another really old bookstore, and I think I got it because it's like volume 1 number 1 in 1965, and I felt like this is just not really like as in I desperately wanted to read it. The first piece seems interesting because it's like on Anna Karenina. It's not that much about reading, but more as keeping as like a sort of souvenir that looks really cool. Granta. This is issue 126 called Do You Remember? It's, you know, like really about remembering and stuff. And I read some of it, but they were like a while back. I don't really remember. I didn't finish it. I feel like I didn't enjoy it that much. I think Granta for me is really like a hit and miss. Sometimes I would really like the writing, but oftentimes not. It really depends. John Stuart Mill, Utilitarianism on Liberty and Other Essays. Yes, it was one of my set texts last year, but I didn't really read on Liberty because like I didn't do my exam on it, and so I didn't really need to study it. But I definitely don't regret that I bought this book. It wasn't that expensive anyways, and just for my own interest, I feel like I might read Mill sometime. Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. This is like the most ridiculous piece of book I own, because when I was in like first year, one of my friends gave me this for my birthday because he was like, you study philosophy. He doesn't study philosophy, and he thinks people who study philosophy ought to want to read this book or have read it, which is so not true, because it's like one of the most daunting pieces of philosophical works that everyone knows. It's just daunting. So I might start it in third year when I do pick like the European Hegel, Kant, Nietzsche paper. I think I'll do that then, but definitely not now. I don't want to torture myself with this. English critical texts. I think this showed up in one of my previous videos. I'm not sure, it was a few months back. Basically, it's a collection of very well-known pieces of writing by well-known critics on English criticism. And there's like Matthew Arnold, D.H. Lawrence, T.S. Eliot, Samuel Johnson, and you know, just all those really famous people. Sartre. I've mentioned his novel in a previous video and I really loved it. This is the first non-fiction work, like philosophical work of his that I bought. I actually haven't started it. Looks really interesting because it talks about Sartre's worldview and artistic vision. This book is an extended examination of the concepts of nothingness and freedom, both of which are derived from the ability of consciousness to imagine objects both as they are and as they are not. So yeah, this is probably one of his lesser famous works, obviously not like as famous as Being in Nothingness, but that book, I saw it at the bookstore, it's gigantic. I don't think I want to put myself through that. Like when I start a famous author and I know this author's going to be difficult, I usually start from a lesser famous and like shorter work. So I do look forward to start this soon. This is actually one of the ones on top of my non-fiction to read list. Camus' The Rebel, which I've already had a few videos where I talked about it in my monthly readings. I didn't finish it because I felt like it was too rambling, even though there are some really interesting and valid points in this book. Moving on, I have the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. It's shown up in my video before and I will link that here, so nothing much to be said about this. Wittgenstein's Tractatus. Well, it's one of the texts that we have to do for our paper on analytic philosophy, and I bought it. We have lectures on them next term, so I will be reading that. Maybe I should read it before my lectures or read it alongside. I don't know, haven't decided. George Orwell's another Penguin Great Idea series, Books versus Cigarettes. Haven't read this yet. It's basically got, you know, a few of his interesting essays. I actually quite like George Orwell's essays. I've read a few of them, and so I'm interested to explore this. Translations from the philosophical writings of Gottlob Frege. That was what I had to read for some of my essays and like supervision readings. There's A lot of his really famous essays that I've read, like Exceptional Begriff Shift, Function and Concept, on Concept and Object, on Sense and Reference, and What is a Function, etc. And these I've all read and like written essay topics on them. Truth, another philosophy supervision reading, because I did write an entire essay on the idea of truth, and there's basically like so many different theories that's covered in this book on what truth is. This is also another university reading, Aesthetics and the Philosophy of Art. It's basically like an article anthology of different types of articles on aesthetics, very much related to my course. So it's got sections like how to identify art, how do you interpret artist's intention, what's the value of art, and you talk about fiction or pictorial art or music, and just like popular art or like art in nature. Another anthology on epistemology. I probably just read like 1 or 2 articles in here. It was probably because I couldn't find them online, so I borrowed it. And yeah, so I just have that. I've got intellectual property law, business law, English legal system, family law. Well, I'm not a law student. And the reason why I have these is partially because of my extended essay, which deals with a lot of law topics. Like, one of my essays just deals with, you know, the legal system and the fair quality of justice, which this one is really relevant, and the other one is like justifying IP, so this one is really relevant. And the other two, like family law and business law, it's just because I am considering like pursuing a career as a solicitor in the future. Like, even if I don't do a law degree right now, I could do a conversion. So I am reading on just aspects of law that I'm interested in, and that's why I have these books. I don't really like reading. I like a law student. I don't study. I just kind of like flip through it for my own interest, just to like familiarize myself with some concepts. And then yes, Virginia Woolf Selected Essays, that was also a library book that I borrowed for my previous video. The Art of the Advocate, yes, that's also a college library book. I think this is also something that I'm planning to read in supplement of my essay, because it talks about the court justice system. Legal reasoning and legal theory, yes, another one that I'm trying to read to help me write my essay better, because right now it isn't going very well. Now onto the final shelf, which is basically stuff I've already read. First one, Dubliners by James Joyce. I really like this. I did mention a lot of its stories in one of my reading summaries. Virginia Woolf, the complete short edition, this has also featured in a lot of my monthly readings, and I think most of the books here, including, you know, like Starts, Nausea, also like they all featured in my monthly readings. And if you just go to like my monthly reading playlist, and under each video I do have a catalogue of which ones that are mentioned in each video, so that would help you find these books if you're interested in checking them out. Confessions of an English Opium Eater, I really like that, it's interesting. David Hume on suicide. I think for this one, it's a bit of a hit and miss. Some were really interesting, but the other essays were just a bit like, not sure what you're talking about. On solitude, yes, this one is even bigger of a hit and miss. Basically, I think it's because some of the stuff he says makes sense, but some of the stuff is just so aristocratic. Like, you wouldn't think about those stuff or have those sorts of views or even conceive of life in that way if you're just not like raised as a rich landowner in like the 17th century. The philosophy and the novel, I've also mentioned this, like maybe like 2 pieces of essays from here on In Search of Lost Time and Anna Karenina. The Fall, I would highly recommend this book. The Stranger used to be my favorite book until I read this one. I wouldn't say which one I prefer. I think they're probably on par. Maybe The Fall is edging up a bit, but it's so good. It's also been featured in one of my monthly reading. Effie Briest, if you're interested in kind of like a German version of domestic realism, I would recommend you try it. It's actually quite interesting, but not like stunning. Freedom. This is like about freedom in political philosophy. I haven't touched this book. I don't know why I have it. Plato's Republic. I have an entire video on this and I will link that here. Next one, How to Be Bored. Oh, it's so bad. I don't know what to say about it, and it's like sister self-help book, How to Find Fulfilling Work. I've basically linked my video here on assessing these 2 books and the overall idea of self-help, so check that out if you're interested. Camus, The Plague. I didn't finish it. Probably one of like the few Camus works that I didn't like, because it really dragged on and I wasn't really sure like what the focus was. Especially like when you read it in COVID, you feel like, oh, it's so relevant and the situation interesting, but then it just drags. And it's like The Rebel, even though it wasn't fiction, but those two just have a commonality is that they drag. Narcissus and Goldmund, that's also being featured in my Hase video. Siddhartha, featured in the same video. Both are really interesting books, but I would prefer Siddhartha a little more. And I think they're both very much about realizing yourself and life and a spiritual journey. The Bloody Chamber, this is featured in my overrated books video. Don't read it. Notes from Underground, I would recommend it so much. I love it. It's basically like this man who, for the first half of the book, spends his time like ranting about his life and like philosophical theories and his psychology and everyone he hates, and the second half of the book is about actually parts of his life, all the setbacks and the humiliations and all the unfavorable stuff that he suffered. This book is really good because it's got like the second section which has like criticism of the book, and it's written by a lot of really famous people, and it's like this huge set of essays, and I really like the notes and critical editions of books. I also do have that copy for Jane Eyre, and it's got like a lot of criticism at the back, and it just really helps you understand the text better. House of the Dead, yes, I like that, and that was also featured in my August possibly monthly reading. On the Suffering of the World, Schopenhauer, I liked most of the essays, except the ones where he was really bit harsh on women, and we know a lot of the famous German philosophers are very, very misogynistic. Virginia Woolf, Jacob's Room, I read it, I liked it moderately, probably one of the lesser ones of Woolf's work, and her style hasn't like completely broken into her mature style, and it's like in between her early and later, and it's just a bit weird. Like it's fragmented, but not fragmented in a soothing way, it's just in a weird fragmented way. But still, I do enjoy Woolf's writing overall. It's just, I feel like it wasn't as good compared to other works. Dostoevsky, A Gentle Creature and Other Stories, I didn't actually like this collection of stories that much. I think I liked like 1.5 or 2 of it, but I didn't like the other one out of the 3 stories collected here. Virginia Woolf, The Voyage Out, I've also featured it in one of my monthly readings. I actually moderately quite enjoyed it. So this is like exactly the thing I'm talking about. So this is like one of her earlier styles, and I think it's fine. Like her earlier style, I'm not saying it's worse than her later style, but Jacob's Room is like stuck between her early and later style, so it's like a really awkward mix. It's like you haven't fully fledged there, but you're not in your earlier self. But this one just really stuck with her more earlier styles, like strict Edwardian Georgian writing, so that was interesting. The Heart of the Matter, I've mentioned it in one of my earliest monthly reading videos. It's pretty interesting, has a lot of revelations about life, but it does drag a little. Here is a tour of my entire bookshelf. Thank you for watching, and I would really love to hear whether any of you guys' to-read list or have read list coincides with mine, and which ones you would really recommend me to try first in the immediate future on my to-read list, because obviously I haven't read those books, so I don't know which ones I would expect to be the really good ones. And again, thank you for watching, and please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed my video.